I was actually at a moment where I was beginning work on what I'm calling a grim Latino fairy tales. Like, it's a cycle of plays. I'd actually begun on the first one. The River Bride is the second one, but it's the first one for me to complete. And so I was at a moment where I was kind of thinking, well, I need to find two other ideas for a play. And I happened to just be watching one of my favorite shows, and it was a marathon of all these episodes, and they were splashing trivia at the bottom, and they happened to have an episode set in the Amazon. And one of the bits of trivia that came across the screen, I just happened to look up. So it was it was kind of like, here's a gift from the universe, because I was doing other like busy work in my house, and I just happened to look at the screen, and it talked about how the folklore in the Amazon about the river and the dolphins that live in the river. And that's when like a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, that's the next play. So I immediately went online, started looking up the folklore about the dolphins, and went from there, started writing the play. And then the first thing I wrote for the play was actually a poem, because I come from poetry. I'd been a poet for a good 10 years before I transitioned to playwriting. And so I wrote a prose poem, which, if you have the script, and not everybody, it's not a published play, but before the script begins, there's the prologue, which is the poem for the play. In the Amazon, time stands still, as if this river wrapped its long body around it and contracted. The only time here is once upon a time, somewhere between dream, between myth, between the shores of reality and folklore.
When I first read the play, the prologue really struck me. And so we are in this negotiation and exploration of figuring out, does that original genesis of the idea of the entire play have a place within this play? So we're in the midst of kind of exploring how that initial poem, which for me is the seed of who Maricela is as an artist. It's what the audience is going to experience with this play. We often talk about this play of being Lorca says a poem is a play on its feet. No, a play
is a poem standing up.
Yeah.
I love that
I just
line.
killed that quote.
Nah, I'm sorry.
But
It's
we
great.
have been like loving that and like kind of using that as an inspiration. And so for me, connecting it to that original spark that went from witnessing the idea, researching the idea, and writing this poem, which was actually a gift to somebody.
It was my friend Kathy Roberts, whose husband is a playwright, and they were celebrating like a big birthday, and Aaron said, well, I would like you playwright friends of mine to write a 2-minute play. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. That was before I started participating in the 1-minute play festival, which is even shorter. I was like, I can't write a 2-minute play. I'll write her a poem. And so I had a little bit of the idea for the River Bride in my head. So writing the poem was sort of like, here's a synopsis of the play in a sense, because it does, like the second part of the poem, because it's got one part and then the second part kind of gives you quite a bit of information about what's going to happen. So, but I gave her the poem, but not just the poem. I created what's called a broadside. So it's a poem paired with an image. And one of the things, I'm an imagist as a poet, but also as a playwright. So when I started sort of thinking about this play, one of the things I did is I researched images. I was looking for images of women in water. And I came across this amazing photographer named Tony Fursell. And there's an image on the front of the script, and the image that they're using, OSF is using, is one of her photographs. And so I made a poem, like a gift, where it was the poem and then the image right above it, and put it in a big frame. And thankfully that image is in the public domain, because it's really funny. She's a lawyer, so when I gave it to her, I was like, it's okay that I gave you this image with this poem.
But to jump on that, which I'm a big believer in fate and things happen for a reason and people are brought together for a reason, is I also love images and work from images, and had been gathering images just for my own. I'm a big Pinterest fan, so I've got all like files and images that I pull from. And the same exact image that Maricela has on her script, I had pulled a year before and was sitting on my desk as something that just inspired me. I don't know, it wasn't connected to a project or anything, but it just kind of encapsulated where I was at that point in time in my life. And so when Bill Rausch sent me the script, partnering us together, saying, here, read this play and let me know what you think, before, we do some matchmaking, I was like, oh my gosh, that image that has been on my desk for a year, a playwright has it on the cover of their play, which playwrights don't always have images on the cover of their play. And it was like kind of this full circle moment of like, oh my gosh, I have to do this play. Before I even read it, I felt like this connection to the piece. One of the things that I loved about that prologue that Maricela wrote is that it really attaches itself to this idea of grim Latino fairy tale.
Mm-hmm. So it's a cycle of plays, and like I said earlier, The River Bride is the second play in the cycle, but the first one to be completed. It's kind of confusing. But it's important to note that just because the first play is what got me on the fairy tale track, is I was starting to write a play, and I was trying to write a myth, because I really love Greek mythology. I grew up with it, and I love astronomy and the stories that are connected to it in mythology. And I was like, well, I would like to write my own, so I decided to try. So I started working on it, and it didn't feel like things were clicking. Like in my head, I was like, this doesn't feel like a myth. I'm not sure what's going on. The way people are talking to, like the characters, how they were talking to one another, just sounded really weird. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I was just sort of, going on the ride and trying to figure it out. Then I happened to watch, I was watching this old show that used to be aired in the 80s called The Storyteller, which was a Jim Henson show.
Oh, right.
And he paired it with people as well as with like his Muppets. And they did grim fairy tales. Like they did really old Brothers Grimm fairy tales, like ones that I'd never heard and didn't grow up with. And they were dark and had magical creatures that people would talk to. And I was watching one, it was this girl, and she was talking to this talking lion. And the way she was not surprised to like encounter him and just had a conversation with him, and I was kind of struck by that idea. I was like, that's what's going on. I'm writing a fairy tale, just the way they were talking to one another. And so I decided, oh, okay, I can do that, because just like I grew up with Greek mythology, I think a lot of us, especially here, have grown up with fairy tales in our culture. And not just the ones you grew up with in storybooks, but of course, there's a lot of children movies that are based off of fairy tales. So I decided, okay, I'm writing a fairy tale. That gave me some sort of structure, because fairy tales, especially the European canon, offer a lot of kind of structural elements, like especially the things three. Three is a big thing. The three little pigs, the three billy goats gruff, or that the hero in the story has 3 attempts to try and overcome some sort of obstacle or challenge. So that kind of helped the framework, but in the way characters were talking to one another. So I felt like I was inspired definitely by and influenced by the Brothers Grimm, how they had these dark cautionary tales. And those stories are very dark. They're not sanitized the way the fairy tales that maybe I saw a movie growing up. We saw The Little Mermaid, and I was like, it's really sweet. It ends really well. You read the original, and it's really sad and tragic. And there's something about that. And what I had read when I was looking into the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales is that those were cautionary tales, because the world was a very dark, dangerous place. And how do you teach children to navigate that world? So, and then I guess, so that's the Grimm part in the Latino Grimm fairy tales. And then, of course, the Latino part is that I'm looking for inspiration from my own cultural community. So The River Bride is inspired by Brazilian folklore. The other plays are inspired by other folklore from different parts of Latin America. And so my thought is, it's a fairy tale, but it's not for children. These are stories these are cautionary tales for adults to help us navigate our own lives and the emotional world that we live in. So that's kind of like, that's what all the words in that cycle mean. So it's like grim Latino fairy tale. Yeah.
It's super exciting. I mean, what has been interesting is then, so also we talked about is how the River Bride itself became very instinctual for you to write, that you just like sat down while you were struggling with the first one, you sat down to do this one, and it just kind of flowed out of you.
It was the fastest thing I'd written. I mean, yeah.
And that it was incredibly organic. And so what I was blown away by throughout this entire, partnership and with the designers as well as now currently in the rehearsal room with the actors is that spirit of organic creativity is in the DNA of the play. And so all artists kind of have their way of entering into a creative process, myself included. And what's been so fascinating about The River Bride is literally kind of going on the ride of the Amazon. I mean, the room is filled with metaphor. Like we're constantly like making really bad metaphorical jokes about, parodies on the word river and water and things like that, and fish. But it is really the heartbeat of our play, and the heartbeat of our collaboration has been, okay, so let's read the scene, let's read what's coming up from the words, let's unearth what is not being said. How can the actors add to that? The actors are then asking questions saying, how I want to source from the words what is missing, what is there. And so it's just been a really beautiful process, a really joyful process between all the artists in the room, is this kind of giving and taking and listening and flowing and really just kind of going with where this play is leading us. So we are like in it, like we are really like baking it right now.